Appreciate having so many of you out here tonight. And what we wanted to do before we get started with the main program is, I was just mentioning a moment ago, one of the things we've been talking about with the committee that puts on the Voices for a Stronger Guilford is some ways that we can use technology to hear your voice as a part of these programs. So what we have set up for you tonight is a few poll questions. And as everybody's filing in and getting set up on their phones, I just want to explain to you with a couple of questions sort of how this works. There'll be a couple of types of questions for you. One type is a multiple choice. And as you answer, anonymously, your answer will be registered when you press the send button at the bottom of your interface. And then we will be able to see in real time what some of the experiences are of the people in the audience. This question asks you, which actor played the best version of Batman? Again, there's no right or wrong answer. Please raise your hand if you're having difficulty getting on as we're doing these sample questions, and then somebody can come around and maybe kind of help you. And I want to also thank everybody in advance for testing this out. This is sort of a trial run for us, and it's something we hope to incorporate in the future programs to include your voice a little bit more in the program. I like the term thanks in advance because it doesn't really give people another option but to say yes, right? Okay, let me go on to another question. This question asks you, how smart is your cellular telephone? Now, this is a ratings question, and what we want to do is you'll hit the star for 1 star if it's a 1. If you think it's a 10, you'll hit 10 star. And again, like I mentioned before, send your answer through by hitting the green button. And that's good to see. That's probably why we're having so much good luck with this program, because everybody's got pretty smart cell telephones out there. All right, so y'all get the hang of it. Now I'm going to move on to some questions a little bit more related to this program. Again, anonymous, what is your age range? This gives us a little bit of an idea about who is in our audience. Thank you. I'm seeing that up at the top corner, there's 52 people participating, so this is fantastic. Moving on to the next question. How would you rate your overall political philosophy? 1, extremely liberal, 10, extremely conservative. Do you know an undocumented immigrant? Which best describes your perception of the change in immigration policy since last year at this time? One other thing I want to say, our moderator, Whitney, is up here taking in some of this information, and this is also very useful for her to sort of see a little bit about where you are in the audience leading up to our main discussion. How much do you believe immigrants enrich our community? Again, this is a ratings question, so you'll indicate between 1 and 10 stars. And a final question, how much do you believe immigrants positively affect our community's economy? Ratings question, 1 star to 10 stars. Okay, I really want to thank all of you for participating in this, and it seems to have worked all right so far, so hopefully we'll be able to do more of this kind of thing so that we can hear your input and your voice as a part of these forums. What I want to do now is the holiday season is coming up. It's a good time to do some banking. So what I want to do now is introduce our main guest from PNC Bank. Is Justin here? Let's give Justin Spradley a round of applause. And Justin is a vice president at PNC Bank, and we really appreciate all of their support of this program and this discussion.
Thank you, Tom. I'm delighted to welcome all of you this evening to this really important conversation, this forum on immigration. Especially want to thank Alan Johnson and Danny Finnegan and all of the staff at the News and Record for helping put together this event. It's great to see so many here participating this evening. You're, engaged citizens, the engaged citizens of Greensboro, all of you are really what makes this such a vibrant and loving community. This is our 4th forum, and you're the reason why we continue to be involved in this event with the News and Record. So we're honored to be a sponsor along with our other media partners. We thank you again for coming this evening, and I want to hand this over now to Danny.
Thank you. I do have to correct one thing. I really didn't have anything to do with putting this together tonight, but Alan and a great team did, and I want to thank them. I want to thank you all for coming on behalf of the News and Record. I want to thank our moderator and our panelists. These are really important events for us, so it's great to have the backing of PNC on this. Our role in the community is important to us. I know some of you are aware that a big part of our production facility has moved to Winston, but I want to assure you we're here to stay in Greensboro. We're not leaving Greensboro, so we'll be. Thank you. We'll be continuing to do these types of events because, as we heard, it is really important, and these topics are things that we need to have discussions about in a civil manner and come together and hear different viewpoints. So I also want to thank Tom for bringing us Slido, and it looks like it really is going to be neat. We'll be back to do a little bit more on that later. And I also want to thank Tom and Fawn Finley for the video you're about to see, which is a short, informative piece that will set the context for tonight's discussion. So on with the show.
Immigration has been part of the political discourse since our country's inception. Following the American Revolution, Thomas Jefferson was in favor of recruiting immigrants to populate the military and boost the economy. From 1815 to 1865, there was an influx of immigrants to the United States from various parts of the world. But by the mid-1800s, laws were enacted to restrict immigrant populations. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 banned Chinese laborers from coming to America. By 1890, the first federal immigration station was set up in Ellis Island, New York, and tracked more than 24 million people. In 1917, Congress passed legislation requiring immigrants to take literacy tests. In 1921, quotas were established. And in 1924, the U.S. Border Patrol was created. There was a shift again in 1965 when the Immigration and Nationality Act was passed, removing quotas and allowing immigration from any country. Let's explore the different types of immigration statuses. Naturalized citizens, those born outside of the U.S. who meet the criteria to have the same rights and privileges as U.S. citizens. They have taken an oath to support the Constitution and the laws of the United States. Lawful permanent residents, also known as green card holders, may live and work in the United States permanently. Refugees and asylees, those who come to this country for protection from racial, religious, political, or nationality-based persecution. Refugees and asylees may apply for legal permanent resident status after 1 year. Students, vacationers, and certain classes of workers here on temporary visas are not considered immigrants. Immigrants living in this country that fall outside of these categories do not have legal status. In 1986, under the Reagan administration, the Immigration Reform and Control Act was passed, granting legalization to millions of unauthorized immigrants. The terrorist acts of September 11, 2001 exposed vulnerabilities in the federal government's immigration policy. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who attended North Carolina A&T University, helped to plan the attack. From these events, the Patriot Act emerged. It amended the Immigration and Nationality Act by prohibiting representatives of foreign terrorist organizations from entering the U.S. Since that time, several attempts to pass comprehensive immigration legislation have failed. Between 2004 and 2007, President Bush advocated a plan that included a guest worker program, a path to citizenship, and tighter border security. In 2010, President Obama also failed to pass new immigration laws. So in 2012, President Obama used the power of the executive order to create the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, also known as DACA. This order provided protection for children who were brought to the U.S. at 16 years of age or younger. The majority of DACA recipients are now in their mid-20s. The Obama administration, however, was also responsible for 438,000 deportations in 2013, the highest in more than a decade. On September 5th, the Trump administration rescinded DACA. Current recipients will retain legal work permits until their protections expire. The first of these expirations begins in March of 2018. Currently, there are 11.1 million undocumented immigrants in this country. In North Carolina, there are approximately 350,000 undocumented immigrants. Guilford County is the home to Latin Americans, Pakistanis, Africans, and East Asians, including the Montagnard refugees who fought alongside U.S. Special Forces in the Vietnam War. These people represent varying immigration statuses. Without a specific policy regarding immigration, the path for immigrants, particularly undocumented ones, is unclear. The path is equally unclear for our country, our state, and our community. Our panelists are here with you tonight to explore this critical subject. Our moderator, Whitney Grove VanDerWerff, is a member of the Board of Directors for the League of Women Voters of the Piedmont Triad. Our panelists, Laura GARDUñO-GARCIA is a DACA recipient who was born in Mexico City. She is a community activist who currently lobbies politicians for a comprehensive immigration plan. Jeremy McKinney is an immigration attorney and National Secretary of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Sheriff B.J. Barnes was elected in 1994 and is the longest-serving sheriff in Guilford County history. Adamu Muhammad is from the African country of Niger. He is a grassroots organizer with Church World Service and former chair of the International Advisory Committee. Ross Parmenter is a New Zealand native who works in security. It took 14 years for him and his wife to become U.S. citizens. Please welcome our moderator and panelists.
Again, welcome to all and gratitude to the News and Record. Tonight's community forum is called Immigration, Finding a Way Forward. Let's consider how fluid the situation is around immigration here. How much has happened very recently here. For 3 months, Minerva Garcia received sanctuary in the Congregational United Church of Christ in Greensboro until a judge vacated her deportation order. 4 days ago, Minerva received a letter from ICE ordering her to come tomorrow, Thursday, to an appointment at the ICE offices in Charlotte, where there may or may not be a new deportation order for her. Juana Torbar Ortega remains in sanctuary in St. Barnabas Episcopal Church. Triad DACA recipients and other immigrants met with elected officials in Washington last Thursday to advocate for a Clean Dream Act. Tiaro Diallo was recently told by ICE that he is being deported from Winston-Salem to Guinea, where he saw his mother beaten to death, nearly beaten to death by police. He was slated for deportation yesterday. And every day, immigrants are woven into the patterns of our daily lives as students, teachers, construction workers, business owners, domestic and service workers, farmers, first responders, nurses, medics. Tonight, we'll be hearing from our panelists and from you with your questions, and we'll be wrestling with some dissonance, of course. Bear in mind the words of a wise man who said that the true voyage of discovery lies not in finding new landscapes, but in looking with new eyes. Let's look with new eyes tonight and see what we discover. As your moderator, I ask everyone, including our panelists, to listen and understand, to refrain from interrupting, and to tell the truth with compassion. We will follow those guidelines this evening. To get started, and so that we know the panelists a little better, here's a question for each of them. The question for each of them, so we know them better, is this. By way of introduction, please think back and tell us what first drew you to the issue of immigration reform. What first drew you to this issue? And I'll start with Laura, who is right here next to me.
Good evening, everyone. I can remember when I was in California and I was growing up with my sisters and my parents, but this issue has been part of my life since I am 1 year old. I am 32 today, and it was in 1986 when I first got to Los Angeles, California. And all of my life, my parents have told me that there is something unique about me. They never necessarily phrased it as a weakness or a deficiency, but it was a challenge that I would have to face. And I remember very specifically one of my most cherished, or one of the most important memories that I have of California is mastering Spanglish, but also repeating the Pledge of Allegiance. I would repeat it, I think, before I would go to sleep. And my parents were very aware that I enjoyed repeating it. But my father told me, I know that you think the flag that you claim as yours is the one with the stars, but that flag doesn't recognize you as its own child. And that was something that I always knew. I always knew that there was something different about me, even growing up here in North Carolina. And my undocumented status didn't really mean anything to me until I became a teenager and I wanted to drive, and I was contemplating graduating from high school and going on to college. And that's when I realized that it would be something real for me. And so that journey continues as I sit before you today.
Thank you. Jeremy McKinney.
Good evening, everyone. I'm a local Greensboro attorney, and what drew me to immigration, I guess I'm not an obvious target to be an immigration attorney. I took Latin in college. I did not take immigration in law school. But I graduated in '96 and was contemplating hanging my shingle here in Greensboro and thinking about what could complement the usual practice of a new attorney, you know, doing traffic tickets and showing up for court-appointed cases and doing what you could to eke out a living. And I had been exposed briefly to immigration at my first job, and it made me think about the incredible need for competent legal help here in Greensboro. Most immigrants at that time and businesses that were and family members that needed immigration attorneys were going to Charlotte or Raleigh. In town at the time, excuse me, there were 2 immigration attorneys and roughly 45,000 immigrants in the region. So that began with a strong economic argument to get into this area. Over the next 4 years, immigration complemented my practice, but the work, that's where my passion is, right? That's what developed over the years. You learn that these individuals are some of the most vulnerable people in our community and most in need of help, and it's where resources still to this day lack. Immigration attorneys in this city are not competitors. We are colleagues and friends, and we are kind of co-conspirators in our battle many times with the federal government in a civil context, right? In a litigation context. So I'm a proud immigration warrior from South Central Virginia.
Thank you. Sheriff B.J. Barnes.
I'm Sheriff B.J. Barnes, and I almost failed Latin in college. I was smart enough to get out of it before I did. My first opportunity to work with any type of immigrants was as a young Marine in Camp Lejeune. And I worked with the Montagnards who were coming over at that particular time, were being brought over because of the strife in their own country and the countries surrounding Vietnam. And I was struck by the fact that as I worked with them of how they were so hardworking and how their interests were in trying to learn about America. We live in the greatest country in the world. I can well understand why anybody would want to come here and want to be here. The Montagnards that I worked with end up being assimilated into the local population there, and actually, as far as I know, did a fantastic job. But again, the first thing that struck me as I watched and listened to what they had to say was the struggles they were having, for example, with the lack of the English language and how they tried to communicate, and that was the first obstacle they ended up having to come through. But those are the type of things that I grew up with as a young Marine, and now it's my responsibility as the sheriff to deal with whatever immigration issues that come across our desk that we have responsibility for. And to be quite frank with you, as you're going to find out tonight, there are not that many.
Thank you. Adamu Muhammad.
Good evening, everyone. I'm glad to be here with you. My name is Adamu Mohamed. I'm originally from Niger, West Africa. what drew me to the immigration issues started when I was growing up as a child of a migrant. My dad migrated from Niger to Nigeria at a very young age because of the drought and famine that were happening in my original country. Went to Lagos, Nigeria, where he settled, and growing up in Lagos, Nigeria as a child of an immigrant was a tough experience at first, but with time we integrated. But at some point during the political upheaval there in 1993, I remember we were basically attacked because we were deemed to be we were strangers. We were not from there, we were not accepted. So that dawned on me that even though you might be living in a country, growing up in that country, feeling you're part of that country fabric, and then because of some political interest or affiliations, you will be singled out as the other person. So we had to leave Lagos, Nigeria. My dad moved all of us back to the north. And in 2001, I was fortunate enough to come to the United States to pursue my education. But unfortunately, in 2003, I lost my student status because of situations with my dad, who suffered a stroke and he couldn't continue to pay for my education. And so I had to decide, coming from a family of 13 children, as the only one in the family to be in this country to support my dad and also my brothers and sisters back home. And in doing so, being somebody who is a little bit educated in this country compared to many from the Niger community who mostly spoke French, and language was one of the barriers that my community at the time faced. And I saw many immigrant parents after 9/11 really being afraid to even take their children to school, register their children in school, because they were afraid, because they were undocumented, that the new policies will put them in trouble. They might be stopped in traffic by law enforcement officers, and they might end up in deportation. So that really motivated me to do more in terms of reaching out to other communities. And I found out that actually there are more members in the community that share the same experience than people in my community. And I was fortunate enough to meet many people in the immigrant community, in the Latino, and other communities that really were passionate to try and find ways to make sure that people who are living here, peacefully, hardworking immigrants, have a peace of mind. And so for us to continue to push back and fight for immigration reform or some sort of relief for immigrants. And many of those people are here in the room today, and I'm really grateful to be here today and also be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ross Parmenter.
Good evening all, my name is Ross Parmenter. I was born in Middle-earth, for those that understand that reference right there. In mid-90s, I moved to Australia. I met my wife there. We were married there, and she got a teaching job out here, so we came out on J visas, which do not give you access to permanent US residency. So it was a 3-year visa, and at that particular point, we found Jeremy and started the process, and that's when it really became a reality that it's going to be a very laborious, very expensive, very frustrating road with no guarantees. So we went through the process from visa to green card to US citizenship in August the 23rd of 2013. So if you need a good immigration attorney, that guy.
Thank you. We're not going up and down a line anymore. We're going to jump around a little bit. And we're going to start with some questions that have come in. And as you know, more will continue to come in from you tonight. But when you registered, some of you turned in questions, and we'll be using those at this point also. So for everybody, and I think I'll start right there in the middle with you, Sheriff Barnes. What's your biggest fear or concern related to the current current debate over immigration policy in the United States? What's your biggest fear or concern?
My biggest fear or concern is that Congress is going to do nothing. They've been doing nothing up until this particular point. As a young sheriff, I was given the opportunity in 1998 during my first term, to go to Washington, D.C. and testify before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The testimony was going to be about the impact of drugs upon the local law enforcement. While I was there, and it's in the congressional record, I made the comment at that particular time, we had enough law enforcement to handle whatever we needed to handle as far as the input of the drugs. What we needed to do was have more customs officers to work the borders to help people get across that needed to get across, and to do it legally. My thing to them was, you need to secure the borders to stop the drugs from coming in. You need to secure the borders to stop the terrorists from coming in. But you need to have the borders fixed so people can get in if they want to get in. Again, I told you this is the greatest country in the world, and I do believe that. The problem that I've got is in 1998, I told them, you need more customs officers, you need to work on the border, and that's what needs to happen. In 1998, I said that, and today it is still just as bad as it was then. My fear, my biggest fear, is that Congress is going to do absolutely nothing.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask other panelists to answer that question as they wish. But first, you noticed in your chair that you have index cards. So please, as you listen to the discussion and questions arise, write your questions on the index cards and raise your hand, they'll be collected. Anyone else want to answer that?
Well, Whitney, if I can chime in here.
Of course.
Absolutely agree with Sheriff Barnes. Absolutely. That is my biggest fear, is that Congress will do nothing. Because, and just to kind of fine tune that, because everyone will retreat to their usual partisan corners, and then nothing will happen. And it doesn't matter if the Democrats are in control of a chamber or the Republicans. We get the same result, and we've seen the same result for 2 decades now, as you pointed out. Immigration is not a partisan issue. If you leave with nothing else tonight, leave with that point, that it is not a partisan issue. Ronald Reagan obviously was the one who signed an amnesty bill into law. At the same exact time, he tightened the legal immigration system. And arguably, that is one of the reasons that's led to the problems we're having now, because you granted a blanket amnesty without providing a realistic path to immigrate to the United States. Bill Clinton did some things that were great for immigrants, and then signed the worst immigration bill in our modern history in 1996 called IRA, passed by a Republican Congress, signed by a Democrat president, hated by all. George W. Bush took very controversial efforts to tighten up our national security after 9/11, including asking Arab Americans and Muslim Americans generally, if you were male and in the United States, to register, which was a very scary concept back then. At the same time, George W. Bush was a person who pushed for genuine immigration reform when he was running for re-election and fighting his own party to do it. So very admirable and bipartisan approach that George W. Bush took. Barack Obama has almost the exact same plan as George W. Bush. As you noticed from the piece, it didn't mention President Obama's plan, because that would involve basically repeating President Bush's plan. Did not pass. Created DACA, proposed DAPA, which was deferred action for parents of Americans, something incredibly important. At the same time, President Barack Obama oversaw an ICE that deported more human beings than any president in recorded history. Let that sink in, okay? The point is that for every president in this modern era, there has been things that we can cheer about and things that we can cringe over. It is a bipartisan issue, and we are never going to see a solution until these parties work together.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to answer? Yes, Mohammed.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest fear is that 5-10 years from now, we will still be talking about the same issues. If we don't hold our members of Congress, elected officials, accountable for their inaction. I know there's politics involved. Of course, people from different people are looking at their own interest in terms of being elected. But when will we as community, as citizens, hold them accountable through the power that we have, our votes? When the president passed the DACA executive order, there were people who were talking about being unconstitutional. But it's not about being unconstitutional, it's because it's a president from one party that made that decision. We need to look beyond politics. We need to look at the humane part of this. When you look at DACA recipient, DACA youth, these are people who are contributing tremendously to our community. Immigrant parents, these are people who are working, contributing to our economy. And it was mentioned during the piece that we saw before we came out here. But when should we start talking about all these positive things that immigrants bring to our community and let our elected officials know that they need to act not based on politics, but based on the facts? The facts are there. Immigrants make our community better. Then why can't we do something now instead of playing politics, political football, throwing this around until 5 years from now and 10 years again? So I think we need to start, as people in this room, start making sure that our elected officials are held accountable.
Thank you. And Laura, you had...
As the immigrant on the panel, I should say that my biggest fear right now, and while I agree that Congress should do its job, I would also say that I am afraid when I interact or when I come in contact or when the potential of being in contact with any law enforcement agent is a possibility. I don't fear necessarily ICE right now because I have this semi-protection from deportation that doesn't expire until January 2019. But I understand that my family is at risk if it comes in contact with any law enforcement representative in its daily activities, from going to school or going to work. And that, I think, is something that families across the triad and across the country face. Is this driver's license checkpoint, or is this stop sign, or is my broken taillight going to lead me to deportation? And that is a reality that 6 months ago, when I heard Greensboro police officers speak, and when even I have heard Sheriff B.J. Barnes speak, and I have gotten some kind of reassurance that, no, we're not stopping people, and this stop could lead them to deportation. That's not the goal. 6 months ago, I believed that. 6 months ago, I would sit in an audience and hear people on panels say those things to immigrant people in this community. And today, I understand that as untrue. Because now I have heard from people, immigrant mothers with children who attend the same school as my children do, whose husband is in deportation proceedings and they are currently fighting their deportation order because they failed to completely stop at a stop sign. And Maria's children fear the police, fear a person in uniform, because that translates to them as the potential of being separated from their father for who knows how long, and tossing them into financial insecurity and being separated. And I have 2 children. And our family is a mixed status family. And I cannot tell you how my heart has stopped so many times when the doorbell rings and my children run to a door to answer it. And I want you to think what it would mean for your children to fear that. And we can talk about Congress. And every person here should call their elected representatives and ask for a solution to be passed. But in the meantime, families in this community fear people in uniform.
And I'm sure that everyone in this room is grateful to have the human dimension here of fear introduced, because we can talk about political parties and we can talk about Congress, but that is the reality for the lives of many people who are responding to this forum by sending in questions. I'm going to read one now that has to do with the way ICE is operating and ask our panelists to help us understand the reality of this. I don't know whether this question is based in fact or not, but here's a question that came in from one of you when you registered for this forum. I'm very concerned that ICE seems to operate without any accountability to any governing body. I'm worried that this unchecked power can morph into an even more intimidating agency. It is also a concern that the detention centers are being run for profit, which encourages longer detention. What can concerned citizens do to change the way it operates? The name of this forum is Immigration: A Path Forward. Is there any path forward in terms of the way ICE is operating? And I'm asking this question to a panel of experts. I'll start with you, Jeremy.
Thanks, Whitney. Well, to go backwards through the question, I can absolutely confirm that many, if not most, of the detention centers which house immigrant detainees are private companies. They are privately held for-profit companies. Most in North Carolina, excuse me, in North Carolina, ICE does not have any long-term bed space. So if ICE seeks to detain someone, or if under the law the person is required to be detained, that person is going to be transferred out of North Carolina and away from family, and away from friends, and away from attorneys, right? In many cases in this area, they are transferred to a place called Stewart Detention Center in Lumpkin, Georgia, which is run by a private company who recently, it was Correctional Corporations of America. They recently renamed themselves, rebranded as Core Civic, perhaps out of the understanding that a civil detention center is not supposed to be correcting anyone, right? But that's their bread and butter. It's about $150 a day per detainee, and they make a lot of money. The judges in a court that is within the jail are amongst the most harsh, vigorous judges in America. About less than 10% of the people that go in front of those courts are represented. And the removal relief grant rate, in other words, people that win their cases, 1%. 1%. Statistically, if you can get out of detention, if you can escape detention, and if you hire counsel, your chance of winning is times 12. You have 12 times larger chance of winning your case if you are out of detention and you have counsel. That is based on current immigration court statistics. How ICE is operating now, I would characterize as not smart enforcement. Again, look at the numbers. Roughly 11 to 12 million people in the United States that could be deported, whether they've overstayed a visa or snuck into the country. There are roughly 11 million to 12 million people that are undocumented and could be deported. At our peak, again, President Obama, we were able to deport about a little over 400,000 in 1 year. Now, that's also assuming that no one new came in, that no one overstayed, that no one snuck in that same year. Because if you take the net, then how much did we truly even accomplish at the most effective year of enforcement? Not much. So to think that we can deport ourselves away from this problem is absurd. You would be deporting the population the size of this state, right? About over 10 million people. North Carolina's population is a little over 10 million. So the problem is immense, and we have finite resources, right? You have a limited number of agents, you have a limited number of money, amount of money, and you have a limited number of detention spaces. So what do you do if you have finite resources? You prioritize. You prioritize. Or should we go after a 66-year-old grandfather? I met that person earlier this week. He's scheduled for deportation in 2 weeks. Should we be going after Juana, who is a grandmother and sitting in a church to avoid deportation? Should we go after our dreamers? Should we go after people who have literally proven that they do not have a criminal record? Right? Should we do that just because they had an encounter with an immigration officer? Or should those immigration officers be going out there and searching for the bad guys that some politicians like to put in flashy ads, right? And use terms like MS-13 and the gang threat. They're not focusing on those individuals. They're focusing on anyone they can get their hands on. That's stupid. It's frankly stupid. It's a waste of our resources. We have to get back to smart enforcement. During the last two administrations, we had lots of debate and lots of spirited conversation about who should be prioritized for enforcement and detention and deportation. That was the argument. In this administration, that's out of the window because anyone is fair game. And so I was asked by a reporter the other day, does that strike fear within the undocumented population? I'm like, no, that should strike fear with everyone. And it certainly strikes fear within the lawful immigrant population because they are also in the crosshairs. There's a local university student with an old conviction where he was in the car, and in the car there was marijuana cookies. And that person is now sitting in a jail in Georgia, he's missed now 2 weeks of school at a local university over nonsense like that, right? Detained, right? What happened to bond? What happened to being released on some type of reasonable bond and then going to court and fighting it out? The way that it is happening under this current administration is just complete nonsense, and it's not a smart use of our resources, and it makes us less safe.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask Sheriff Barnes to respond if he cares to. We have clusters of questions around other issues, but I want to have this one explored as thoroughly as possible because of the ramifications for smart law enforcement and for what's going on, which Jeremy has just characterized as stupid. So would you agree, Sheriff Barnes?
No, I would not agree. It is not stupid. There's some extreme cases that he just mentioned there, and I'm sure there's a lot more of them out there just like it. But the truth of the matter is, folks, in the central region of North Carolina, there are a grand total of 8 ICE officers. 8. Not 800, not 80, 8. They have the whole center of the state of North Carolina that they're responsible for. They're the reason they can't get to the jail whenever we arrest someone for breaking into a house, for driving while impaired, for assaulting, for homicide, or whatever. Whenever we call them, as we're obligated to do by law, They can't get there within the 48 hours. But as the attorney will tell you, is that if they make the 48 hours, they made it because they didn't make bond or get out of jail. I'm in the process right now of having an argument, and have been having an argument for about 6 months with ICE about the fact that they want us to hold people on detainers. We don't hold people on detainers, and not many of the sheriffs in this state that I know do. And the reason why is because detainers are against a violation of the Fourth Amendment rights. And people, even if they're here undocumented or illegal, they have rights just like any citizen does. That's what America is all about. And the long and the short of it is that we make sure their rights in the jail are adhered to. He mentioned the fact that there was $100 and some a day they kept to keep these people. Why would they not keep them in my jail? Right now, tonight, we have probably 30 people in there that are undocumented, that are being held for other crimes that they've committed. The thing about it is I think we're getting astray from the actual question here, and the issue is we need to do something about how to get these people, these folks, assimilated into our environment. Because as it is right now, if you start, 11 million, now we're going to use what the video said, 11 million people. If 11 million people cannot be caught by ICE, there's not enough ICE officers there, and local law enforcement, that officer back there in the back of the room, me, none of my folks have any authority at all to arrest any undocumented citizen unless they've committed a crime against the state of North Carolina. Not any of them. So there's no need to be fearing law enforcement. If you don't break the law, then you're not going to have a problem with local law enforcement. Your problem is going to be with ICE, and there's only 8 of them. So granted, there's some issues here in this state that need to be taken care of. But the grand issue that we have has to do with Congress not passing immigration laws that are sustainable and that we can make work for our particular area. Because again, realistically, and I wrote it in an open letter to the Congress that was in the Greensboro News and Record, realistically, even if we had the authority, law enforcement can't pick up 11 million people. We can't put them in jails. There's not enough jail space to put them into. So we're going to have to do something else. And that's where we should be. That's what I think this particular forum should be focused on, is what we're going to do to force Congress, and that's both political parties, I'm not giving any of them a pass, to do what they should be doing to make sure that our communities are safe.
Ross, thank you. I want to ask Ross a question about the sheriff's term, assimilation. We do have a number of questions about measures that have been introduced. For example, the Succeed Act, and we'll go to those in a minute. But the concept of assimilation is what I wanted to follow through with you, Ross, picking up on what Sheriff Barnes said.
Yeah, I think as long as we stay true to who we are as a nation, we're always going to have an immigration issue, whether legal or otherwise. And we've definitely got to do something about it. I don't know how many people in this room are politically active. I call my members of Congress 2 or 3 times a week on the issues that I care about. And is it effective? You can get your voice known, but it's on both sides of the aisle. And to echo what Sheriff Barnes said, this is the greatest nation on the face of God's green earth. It's just simply how it is. I'm thankful I'm here. I was able to do it in a way that was legal. But some people don't have those options. And I think Tom Tillis's program, the Succeed Act, is one thing we could look at. But the problem is with a lot of these bills is they'll start off sounding like they're going to be a great bill, but when they come out the other end, they're so messed up. You get statements like Nancy Pelosi, we need to pass it to find out what's in it. Because that is so messed up. That was, of course, the Affordable Care Act. But that's the problem. There's very few clean bills, but they definitely need to seriously look at, as Sheriff Barnes said, you can't deport 11 million people. It's just not effective. It's not going to happen. So we need to look at a way forward that's actually going to give people that don't have access to a legal path forward. I'm not saying they get to everything they want in the way of unconditional citizenship or unlimited chain migration. But Tom Tillis's plan is, and Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe it's 15 years. They'd have a review every 5 years. They'd have to show that they'd finished school, they had worked within society without criminal history and so on and so forth, and then they'd get access to the green card, and after 5 years on the green card, you'd be eligible to sit the citizenship exam. So a program like that would be great. I think there's only 3 members of Congress that have signed off on it right now. We don't have a diversity problem in this country. I think we're the most diverse nation on the face of the earth. What we have is an assimilation problem, and some people simply can't assimilate because there's no path for them to do that. And that's what we need to change.
Well, thank you. The question that came in from one of you when you registered was about the Succeed Act that Tillis introduced with 3 other co-sponsors. There's another bill also that was introduced that is bipartisan. But the question that came in from one of you is that this recently sponsored Succeed Act came after DACA was rescinded. And the question is, what do the panelists think about it, the pros and the cons? And so I think you have answered, Ross, but perhaps other panelists would like to talk about that in terms of what the pros and cons are. Are there pros and what are the cons? Anyone can answer that one. Laura?
So I'm not really sure what assimilation means, given that the first wave of immigrants didn't really assimilate into what the Native American cultures were. So I'm not really sure what in the world that means. They clearly didn't get the message. So nonetheless, we all bring our talents forward, and that is a point that I am going to bring. I believe that we all can recognize the good intentions and say that while we may say thank you, Tom Tillis, for bringing forward the Succeed Act, and there are a lot of important points that Ross has already made, I, as one of the individuals whom that proposal may impact, definitively say thanks but no thanks. That bill, the proposal, requires individuals to sign away their right to due process if they commit an infraction to these requirements. And I don't know if you've noticed, but people of color are held to a different standard when it comes to the application of the law. And so when there is an uneven application of what the standards are or what requirements must be met, I know going into it that if I make a mistake, it is going to be more harshly viewed than if a white counterpart makes the same mistake. And so when there is a requirement that I sign away my right to due process, and that effectively is signing away my deportation, before I make a mistake, I object to that. I object to that. I don't know what 10 years from now my life would look like, and I certainly do hope that my life continues on the path that it currently is, and that my family stays the way that it is. But there are mental health issues, employment issues that are outside of my control. And if I fail to meet one of those requirements for reasons that I am not able to control, then I am forfeiting my right today for something that will happen 10 years from now. And I don't think that is right. And I don't think that is something that Americans want for their children. Why would I have to accept that? Why? And I'm sorry, I have to go back to a point that was made earlier regarding the 8 ICE officials that are in this region. I don't believe that the individuals that are in jail understand that there's only 8 people that are monitoring them. And it's not just when they're in jail, but it's when they go to court. It's when they are also, when we have to go to court, when we have to interact with law enforcement. That, the number is irrelevant. It's the fear factor that is freezing and effectively impeding us to fully be involved in this community.
But if you don't break the law, you're not going to jail.
Right, but there are people that for failing to completely yield, for a fender bender, and what happens when you're an individual, when you realize that these small mistakes can lead you more quickly than any other person in any other set of circumstances to jail, then that is wrong. I am a person. I can make a mistake, just like anyone else.
Yes, you can, and anybody
if I
can
may.
also. But if you start with the premise that you're here illegally, then that just complicates your problem. Do you not agree with that?
That I am here illegally does not matter.
Yes, it
Does
does.
not matter
We have laws
because-
here.
No, yeah, I understand. There are laws. And I do everything that I can to meet those laws and expectations.
But you didn't if you were here illegally.
May I jump in?
Yes, yes.
Please.
I'm going to call,
Child, she cannot be convicted of saying she was done something illegal. Before she was 16, she was not responsible for that. She's never committed an illegal act.
I've been
You're
trying-
asking law enforcement to pick and choose what they're going to enforce. Law enforcement cannot do that.
You do that every day.
We have a law.
You
Sheriff
do that
Barnes.
every day.
Sheriff Barnes.
I would like to jump in.
I'm
if
sorry,
I may.
we have a guideline here that said do not interrupt, refrain from interrupting, and I'm going to call on Adamu, who has been trying to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Whitney. Laura has probably picked on some of the ideas I wanted to develop. Just going back to the question of ICE enforcement and Sheriff Barnes' comments about there's only 8 ICE officers, and for those people who are in detention now, that people shouldn't be worried. I mean, from what I understood from that. The first thing is, what is happening in DC in Congress, the bills that they were supposed to pass that will affect many millions immigrant community members is one part of the equation. The second one is, what do we do as a community here to prevent members of the immigrant community who are part of our community, who some of them, like young kids who were brought here at a young age through no fault of their own, and then being stopped in traffic for minor infraction and taken into detention, and then the system, whereas you will get your fingerprint taken, and then ICE will send a detainer. You know, I understand Sheriff Barnes said they're not following that rule anymore, but ICE has been going into the courts lately in looking for people. ICE is going to the detention centers themselves. I understand there are only 8 people, but we hear every day there are people who are being detained by ICE in our community. So what role can law enforcement play to prevent people who just got into maybe a minor infraction, an accident, and because they don't have a driver's license due to their status, now going into the detention, and that goes into the detention pipeline where people would then get their fingerprint taken, and then for just a minor infraction, and they will go into the deportation pipeline. So how can we prevent that locally? I think that's the most important thing we have to think about. What happens in DC is sometimes something we cannot control, but let's control what we can here. What can our law enforcement officers, our city elected officials, those who have the power to prevent family members, people who have been here for 24 some years, who are contributing members of the community from going into that path of deportation. You know, when we talk about they're breaking the law or they're here illegally, many people didn't choose to come here illegally. I didn't come here illegally, but I was undocumented for 7 years. So why would you want to qualify everybody as being here illegal? No human being is illegal. We're all human beings. So we shouldn't even be calling somebody as illegal. People came here illegally.
The act is illegal.
No, it's not.
Excuse me.
I will defer to
That's what the
Jeremy to
Constitution
talk
says.
about that.
Excuse me.
Yeah, but to finish, I think we have to be clear as to what can we do as a community to prevent people from getting deported, people who have nothing to be in detention. Criminals, yes, every criminal deserves to pay for their acts, but we saw what was shown in the video. People who were deported, many of them had no criminal infractions. Most of them, in terms of people who were deported, even during the Obama's administration. So how can we fix that? That's the most important thing.
Well, and excuse me, this is the topic of this forum. Is there a way forward? Is there a way forward? And I'm going to wrap up this particular segment by calling on Jeremy, and then we're going to move on to some other questions, particularly those that are clustered around sanctuary cities, which many of you had questions about. Go ahead then, Jeremy.
Okay, just to wrap up this portion, I don't think law enforcement is stupid. I think the way that this administration is carrying out immigration policy is, which, as you pointed out, is not really within, because it's all civil law. It's not criminal law, right? I think that this person right here should be applauded, literally applauded, for upholding the Constitution in the way that immigration detainers are not really honored in this county because they violate the Constitution. And the sheriff and his legal team understand that, and that has made our immigrant community in Guilford County at least a bit safer from some of the abusive practices that we've seen in other places. It's something that resulted in a civil lawsuit in Alamance County, right? You don't see that here, and that's due to Sheriff Barnes. We need to give credit where credit is due. On the Succeed Act with Senator Tillis, I have thanked his office. I have thanked him. I absolutely 100% agree with Laura on the problems with the bill. It's pretty outrageous because by signing away your right to a hearing before a judge, then the dreamers are actually putting themselves from a legal perspective in a worse position than their parents, right? Who would have a right to a hearing if detained by immigration, right? So that is obviously outrageous. It's also not a reason to just say no. What you do, what we've done, and I'm sure your organization has done, is contacted Senator Tillis' office and pointed out that that's really a problematic and perhaps unconstitutional provision that's in the bill that needs to be changed.
Jeremy, what was his response to that?
What was his response to that is that the same response as usual, which is that as it's marked up, as it goes through committee, it's going to go through changes. And that obviously those concerns are very real. But the original bill was designed to attract more conservative members, as evidenced by the fact that one of the co-sponsors is the senator from Oklahoma, and Orrin Hatch in Utah.
I would say that segment has to go. I mean, you can't go violating people's constitutional rights.
Right.
I wasn't aware it was in the bill. That being said, a bill that actually allows people to go through a process.
I mean, why are we talking about the Succeed Act while there's a bill that has more support, the DREAM Act, that has more support of conservative and Democrats?
No, you're exactly right.
Why can't we push that forward?
No.
Why is he going with the one that is not the good one?
I mean, the reason we're having the conversation here is because our senator is the one that's proposed it.
Yeah.
And that is not to say that I am behind the Succeed Act. No, the Durbin-Graham bill is much better from a due process perspective.
Yeah.
And it provides a much better path and a better solution for dreamers like Laura. Absolutely. But the point is that nothing is going to pass unless we get the support of conservative members of the Senate, like Tom Tillis. And so making him part of the process and part of the solution building is something we should encourage. That doesn't mean that we don't speak out against we don't sacrifice our core beliefs or sacrifice the due process rights of vulnerable young people.
I mean, just for those in the audience, please call Tom Tillis, Senator Tillis, and let him know that we all support the DREAM Act. So the more he hears from you that we support the DREAM Act, then he will probably likely support that bill. So please call him. We're now doing a call to action.
All right.
And one final point on,
All right.
hopefully we'll use the term illegal one more time and then maybe dispense with it. Again, immigration law is a civil law like tax, like bankruptcy, okay? Like family law. It is not criminal law, okay? When a person violates a visa, overstays a visa, or violates the terms of the visa, maybe it's a tourist visa and the person works, that person has violated a civil law, not a criminal law. Over 40% of the undocumented population in this country are visa violators. They entered the United States lawfully and either stayed or violated the terms of the visa. That is not illegal. That is a violation of a civil statute. It subjects a person to deportation, but it has nothing to do with law enforcement, as Sheriff Barnes could tell you. People that enter the United States without permission, enter without inspection, they have committed a misdemeanor under federal law. It is a misdemeanor. Do we label people that steal a pack of bubble gum or commit other misdemeanors in this state, do we call them illegal? Do we call them illegal? That doesn't define them. It's a mistake. And it's something that normally is handled with probation and a fine, and yet we don't apply that same kind of common sense approach to this situation. But when we use the term illegal, it immediately cuts off the listening ears of half the room. So I think let's all try to listen to each other, because I think that the points that are being made by Sheriff Barnes and others up here are important. Everything we need to do a lot more listening.
Thank you. And so, acknowledging our good intentions, it is important to acknowledge and to say thank you for coming to a solution in your bill, and this is what we agree or don't agree with it. We're going to close out that segment with the thought that it is really important. We're talking about that one because Tillis is our senator, and it's really important to make that contact. But remember, acknowledge our good intentions. I think we're here with good intentions. So here is, we only have one question that came in as you registered that's about health and health care, but I want to pose it. It came in for somebody who registered. Given recent, and I don't know the answer, and I don't think any of us do, except maybe the panel, given recent national news stories about ICE actively targeting immigrants in or near healthcare facilities, what concrete steps can we take to ensure that members of our community who are immigrants can safely access health care? That's because some of those arrests have been made outside hospitals. 2 recently were inside a hospital. So I don't know the answer to the question. Does anyone on the panel have an answer for that question? Perhaps there is no answer.
I'm gonna go back to what was said earlier. There's only 8 of them, and to be quite frank with you, they're running up and down the road because I've talked to them, trying to get to these different detention centers as they go to see on the folks who have been charged with serious crimes. Because as you just heard me say, and as you heard the attorney say, in Guilford County, for example, if you're arrested and you make bond, then I'm going to let you out because that's what my obligation is. That's the Fourth Amendment rule. I cannot hold you. And basically what it comes down to is if you get through with your case, for example, if you go before the court and the judge adjudicates that you have finished your case, then I'm going to let you go because that's what I have to do. That's what the law says. There has been civil cases all across this nation where local counties and cities have paid huge amounts of money to people who have sued because they were held improperly. We're not going to do that here. We've never done that here, and we're not going to start doing it here. And you're not going to find that around this particular area. Some of those things that you mentioned oftentimes happen around major cities. For example, our folks operate out of Charlotte. The 8 that are here, there is one person in this area that is an ICE agent. One person.
All right. The arrest that was in the news recently was a small town in Texas, and the agent went in, and it was a little girl who is mentally challenged and who had gallbladder surgery. You may have read about that. So we're going to let that question go because the sheriff is assuring us that that's not happening in Guilford County. Laura?
I think I understand the cases in the particular one about the girl, 10-year-old girl with cerebral palsy, and then there was a child who had a heart condition. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that both of them were in Texas.
They were in small towns.
In cities in which the families had to travel across ICE checkpoints because they're close enough to the border where there's another border patrol checkpoint. And so when they had to go through that, that is when Border Patrol became aware of the undocumented status of these families. The 10-year-old girl who was taken into custody for a couple of weeks in a detention center and kept away from her family when she had never been away from her family and has very particular special needs. And the other one in which the infant was had to have surgery and the parents were escorted out after the infant had surgery.
That's correct.
And so in those two particular cases, the families had to go through a Border Patrol checkpoint. I don't think that that is something that we have to worry about in the state of North Carolina because of our distance from the border.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, in addition, that ICE doesn't forget. One of the things that we have seen is that individuals who have had cases of DWIs or whatever from many years ago, ICE never seems to let that go. The person's case may have ended, the person may have paid an attorney to represent them and they had won their case or whatever. It was taken care of. It was something in their past. Just ask Jose Chicas, who is in sanctuary currently in the state of North Carolina. He too had a DWI many years ago or some domestic issues years ago before he became a pastor and led a church. And today, he is currently in sanctuary avoiding his deportation. So again, individuals can make mistakes and maybe even pay for their mistakes, but ICE doesn't forget. And those 8 agents in the state continue to hunt these people down.
And that is a perfect lead. As moderator, I have to take us to the next cluster of questions, which have to do with sanctuary and sanctuary cities. And thank you for reminding us of that case. I think that's in Durham. Yes, that's in Durham. So this, we have a cluster of questions that you've turned in about sanctuary and sanctuary cities. And one of the most accessible ones came in with one of you who registered. And it said, is Greensboro a sanctuary city? If not, how can the community help to get the designation? So I'm going to open that to the panel and ask that perhaps some of the people who've been speaking less on the panel will speak up and speak a little bit more. Thank you. Anybody?
Well, I can jump in about sanctuary city, but just want to touch on one last thing before I talk about sanctuary city is the question about the help, people being afraid of going to seek help, seek care at the hospital because of concern that ICE go to that facility to pick people up. Just coming back to our community, I think we have to look at it from a public safety perspective. You know, people are afraid to go seek help at the hospital because they might be detained by ICE, because ICE is in the area. So what does that tell us? What about people who have been victimized, who are victims of crime, who are undocumented, who live in our community, who see crimes and cannot report them because if they do, then they probably are afraid that their identity might be requested, their ID and their status may be in question, and that can lead them also into certain paths. So I look at that question with healthcare also the same way, where people cannot go seek help. And what if they have something that can, a disease, an illness that can eventually be something that can be contagious because they cannot go and they will stay home. And that will affect the community as well. So that's just what I wanted to talk about. But about Sanctuary City, I think we have a city council member here, and we've talked about that many times. Why isn't our city coming out, taking this bold step in speaking out and speaking up more for our undocumented population? And I just want to give them credit for doing more than sometimes what we've asked them. They've come out and show support. But the question of Sanctuary City, I think, has more political ramification because with Raleigh, they always look at Greensboro as one of the progressive cities where we're the troublemakers. Like anything we do in Greensboro, then they want to make sure that they stop us from doing that. We've heard from members of the city council, the mayor herself has spoken about the challenge. But I think without mentioning Sanctuary City, we can take actions that show that we are a welcoming city. We are a city that protects its citizens, it protects its community, without using that terminology of Sanctuary City.
Well, let's think about whether we can be a sanctuary city or not. I think there's been some attention in the press to House Bill 318. Can you answer that factually, Jeremy? I think we are not allowed in North Carolina to be a sanctuary city. So let's get that clear first.
That's correct, although I am trying to implement the 3 and then me rule. But on this topic, yes. But our starting point for this conversation, Whitney, has to be what is a sanctuary city,
yes,
right?
That's right.
Because there actually is a significant disagreement within the state of North Carolina and the federal government as to what a sanctuary city is. The state of North Carolina, excuse me, allergies. The General Assembly defines it as a local law enforcement agency that refuses to provide information or cooperate with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And so no locality is allowed to not provide information to ICE. Okay? Now, this administration and their crack staff, their definition of sanctuary city is any locality that refuses to uphold a particular section of law. We won't get into that, but the point is that that section of law does not require law enforcement agencies to communicate, to collect information from individuals about their immigration status, or to communicate that information to the Department of Homeland Security. What that statute has is a detainer rule that requires, that is a voluntary request for a local law enforcement agency to illegally hold someone for 2 business days until ICE can grab them. Sheriff Barnes has pointed out that that is unconstitutional because there's no probable cause to hold that person. Right? You don't have any probable cause to hold that person because, again, a suspected immigration violation is a civil law. It's not a criminal law. And it's outside of his jurisdiction. And so under the federal government, this administration's current vision of sanctuary city, Greensboro arguably would already be one. But we know it's not, and we know that no city in North Carolina actually is. What is the term sanctuary city? It's another term that's been planted out there to divide people. Just like amnesty, just like illegals, and other little catchphrases that are meant to divide. Because if you go, the actual definition of sanctuary city is someone where you have localities that refuse to provide any information to the Department of Homeland Security. And that's nowhere in this state.
Thank you, because a number of the questions that you have asked, that really needed to be cleared up. One of you asked, how is a stranger to neighbor city different from a sanctuary city? Another person asked, the federal and state governments have threatened reprisals against sanctuary cities, but aren't there steps Greensboro can take, short of providing sanctuary, but beyond rhetoric about being welcoming? So the question is, and it is wonderful to have a city council member here, the question is, what are steps that Greensboro can take beyond rhetoric about being a welcoming city? And I think that's something that everyone could think about, everyone could answer. Why don't we maybe start with you, Ross?
The problem I have with the term sanctuary city is you look at incidents like in California where I think he had been deported, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, 3 times. He had been ordered deported 5 times. He murdered a young lady. What about her family? Doesn't the state have a responsibility first to its citizens? I would argue the federal government's job is to protect the country and its citizens first. For churches, for example, that are harboring people under deportation orders, I think the role of the church has been clearly laid out by Jesus Christ himself, that it is to go into all the world and boldly proclaim the gospel, seeking to make disciples of all men. So that's the role of the church, in my opinion. Now, a church can come along and love on someone and provide them a safe space to stay, provide medical, provide clothing, provide food. One of the elders that attended a church I went to in Christchurch in New Zealand, he now works in Los Angeles with Spanish-speaking population in South Central, holds dual citizenship with New Zealand and America. He spends 6 months here, 6 months there. And he plants churches, and when people come to faith in Christ, a lot of them are here illegally. And the deal is they can serve in the church, but they can't serve as deacons or elders, and they're under the understanding that if federal authorities come for them, they are to go quietly. There's going to be no, we are a sanctuary church, you cannot violate this, however they want to word it. That's my concern is, shouldn't the federal government's job first be to the people, the Constitution, as actual citizens? The state should be the same way. I think that we run into a very serious risk of, for example, California is trying to vote, I think, on being a sanctuary state, whatever that means to them. And I just think, how should the response be for families that are affected when their children are victims of violent crimes, like, is it Kate Steinle? Is that her name, Jeremy? Is that the case? Something like that, I think.
But Ross, let me ask you this. So are you saying that every immigrant that seeks sanctuary is a criminal that has committed
absolutely
crime?
Not.
Because,
absolutely not.
Because the way I've understood is like you're painting like everybody, every immigrant as somebody who has, I know the state, the government has responsibility to protect its citizen, but not all immigrant that seek sanctuary has committed a crime.
No, not at all.
Okay, I just want to clarify.
But I think we have to be careful. It should be equal application of law. It shouldn't be like we're going to enforce these laws because we agree with them, and we're not going to enforce these laws because we don't particularly like that particular law. I think there's got to be equal application of it. I say you can definitely love your neighbor and care for them and provide for them. And as I say, this is how the church, from the elder that is a friend of mine, deals with it out in California and issues like that. It's the understanding we will provide for you, we will help you in every way we can, but we're not going to be in violation of Romans chapter 13, which clearly states that the government is established by God and they have the authority.
Thank you. I have now the questions that you are turning in, so I'm going to ask them, and it'll be appropriate for certain people to answer them, and others may want to jump in. Everyone has a chance at all of these. Guilford County also has thousands of legal and newly arrived immigrants who need help to assimilate over time, to stabilize their life and family cultures, to understand how to take advantage of opportunities here. There are many agencies and programs working independently, but how can the community create a unified and integrated effort to support their potential and future success? You understand the nature of that question. It affirms who's here and says there are many agencies and programs working independently, but how can the community create a unified and integrated effort to support their potential and future success? That's a question I think for all of us to think about, because we're here of the interest in this subject and the interest in our immigrants, and it's asking how can we work together and integrate this. Are there any answers that come to you, Adamu?
Yeah, first of all, the term assimilation really doesn't really fit with what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve integration. Because assimilation means leaving your own culture and just assimilate into the whatever we call American culture, which is a mosaic of different cultures anyway. So I would prefer us to use the term integration because, yes, immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers live in our community, and there are agencies that help support their integration into the community, into the society. So I think that's one thing I would say, regarding that question. And what can we do? I think first thing is our city. I mean, just an example of a city that I was maybe a couple of weeks ago, Salt Lake City in Utah. They have this wonderful involvement, whereas the city itself is very much involved in the integration of newcomers into the city. They have an office, and immigrants are part of those staff who have been refugees and immigrants themselves, who have the experience, who have the connection with the community. That shows how much a city really wants to integrate its society. Mm-hmm. Greensboro is taking a step, like slow step, but I think we need to do more with this current leadership that will probably take office soon. We hope they can do beyond what they've done. Yes, we've become a welcoming city. We are a stranger to neighbor city, but actions speak louder than words. We have the International Advisory Committee. It's a committee, but we need more teeth. We need to see more from our elected officials, from our city itself or our county, that we are really a welcoming community by doing more than just saying it. I agree.
Thank you. The audience may not know about the International Advisory Committee, so I will ask you, Adamu, to describe that.
Oh, well, the International Advisory Committee is a subcommittee of the Human Relations Commission that was put in place by City Council member here, Mary Kabuzoeda, back in 2008, initiated, and it started with members of the immigrant community coming together on a regular basis, discussing issues that they have and how the city, just bridging the gap between the immigrant community and the city. And just last couple of years, it's become where we have 5 members of the immigrant community elected by members of the immigrant community itself to represent them. But they operate under the Human Relations Commission. They make recommendations, but that needs to be just volunteering, where people who have time volunteer their time. We need to have more commitment. To have commitment and motivation for those people, they need to feel like they are close to the decision making, where they can initiate actions that will help immigrants in the community integrate better.
Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead, Lois.
Thank you. I would like to combine these two matters, both the sanctuary, welcoming city, and how do we integrate as people in this community. First of all, I think I want to say that sanctuary doesn't really mean anything. There are many cities across the country who have declared themselves sanctuary cities, and the people in the community are misled to believe that somehow that entails some sort of protection or shield against ICE. But the city of Chicago is a sanctuary city, and they still have an ICE office there, and that doesn't bar ICE from operating and conducting its operations and detaining people and separating families every day. So that's number one. So I don't really know that I support the term sanctuary, especially if it's going to bring uninvited attention to the city of Greensboro. And it's not going to make us any safer. So that would be the point number one on sanctuary cities. The point number two on integrating and really how do we make the city of Greensboro elevate its actions to meet the language of being a welcoming city, but more I would like to say, or I would like to see a protector city, because we can't stop ICE from operating. We know that, right? It's a federal program. The state really can't, or the city can't really intervene. Okay. But what can the city of Greensboro do to help its Greensboro residents who they cannot protect at the hands of ICE, but they can intervene in the moments, most vulnerable moments?
Excuse me.
But they can play a particular and very important role in alleviating the burdens and the load that immigrant families face after they have been separated from their loved ones at the hands of ICE. So if a room full of Greensboro people with power would be here, I would say, what would you do to help a person just like you who contributes to the city in taxes and et cetera, to the livelihood of this city? How would you intervene to rescue them in that most vulnerable moment in their life? And whether that be a fund or whether that be finding adequate shelter or food or support, I don't know what all of those things might be, as every family faces it differently. But what are the resources that the Greensboro City Council can come up with, and what solutions can they bring forward to say, this is how we're going to intervene on behalf of immigrant families who are a part of our community?
Thank you. I need to honor as many of your questions as I can here toward the end of this forum. And here's one that is a yes or no, and every panelist can jump in, and each one of you has 30 seconds to answer this question. Does Congress fail to pass clear-cut immigration reform because businesses benefit from having laborers whose rights and pay are limited by their legal status? That's an interesting question. Does Congress fail to pass clear-cut immigration reform because businesses benefit from having laborers whose rights and pay are limited by their legal status?
Yes, just ask the private detention centers how much they benefit, and ask after the Trump election how much their stock went up.
Jeremy?
Yes, because when people come out of the shadows and go into a regular lawful immigration system, an employer cannot undercut that worker's wages.
Thank you. Sheriff Barnes?
No, because you're putting a Band-Aid on somebody's head that's been chopped off. Basically, you need to do a little bit more than that, I think, and you're only allowing me a sentence, so that's
I did. You're right. Thank you. Adamu?
Yes, I mean, I believe Congress benefits because people are lobbying. People who own those private prisons are lobbying members of Congress. They're giving them millions of dollars to make sure that the 34,000 beds detention bed mandate stays in place. That's how they make their money. So I think my answer is yes. I mean, definitely it's because of economic benefits that we still haven't seen immigration reform or something of that nature passed.
Thank you. And Ross?
I'm going to go with yes and no, because it's both sides of the aisle. Congress is just not one body, so there's people that benefit on both sides of the aisle. To go back quickly to our previous conversation, I would challenge the people out in the audience. If you're a member of a local church and you're not involved with the immigrant population, whether they be legal or otherwise, then challenge your church to get involved. The church that myself and wife attend has a PTA set up for the newcomers school, which is a Guilford County school, which is foreign nationals from all over the world come in from all age groups. So there's definitely stuff that the church can do. Maybe we need to assimilate a few of these groups together to work as a whole for dealing with that. But as I say, if you're a member of a church and you're not involved in being the hands and feet of Christ to these people in the community that are coming here, then get them involved.
Thank you. This question is for you, Sheriff Barnes, and it's going to be, I think, fairly easy to answer. How many undocumented immigrants have been taken into custody by ICE agents at the Guilford County Jail in 2017? My understanding is that journalist Jordan Green with Triad City Beat has attempted to answer this question with mixed results. That's just a factual question for you. How many undocumented immigrants have been taken into custody by ICE agents at the Guilford County Jail in 2017?
I'd have to do the research on that because I don't know. That it's not that easy to answer because, we're in the 11th month of the year, and so I don't know how many have been taken in. But I can tell you that the number is not that great, and if Jordan or anyone else has asked for the information, I can assure you it's been given to them.
All right, thank you. That answers the question. Can the moderator or someone on the panel please break down the number of illegal immigrants into number 1, entered without inspection, and number 2, the visa overstayers? In other words, what's the percentage here of the visa overstayers and entered without inspection? That's the wording of the question.
It's roughly 40%. Again, it may be like 43 or something in that ballpark, but roughly about 40% of the undocumented population entered lawfully with a visa and then either overstayed that visa or violated the terms of the visa. And the remainder would enter without inspection.
Thank you. We have, in terms of facts about Guilford County and immigrants, Professor Hannah Brown at Wake Forest has done a survey, a study for us. It's in your chair. I'm referring to it now because we're about to wrap up. And when you take this home, this is the kind of statistics that some of you have been asking for. It tells about immigration policy and reform. It has stats on who lives here, undocumented and documented. So thanks, very, very many thanks to her for doing this. And in winding down here, I want to remind us, this is a final question for the panelists. I'm sorry. This is a final question for our panelists. One of the guidelines for this program was listen and understand. Our panelists have been listening deeply to each other as we went through the questions this evening. They've been listening to each other. We're going to conclude by having each panelist ask another panelist a question. And here's how this is going to work. Something that crossed your mind when someone else was speaking. Something that you thought, you maybe thought it, Jeremy, when Laura was speaking. And you thought, gosh, I'd like to ask her about that. So as you deeply listened to her, what is it that you would like to ask her? So this is each one ask one. Each one ask one. So we're going to start with Laura next to me. As you listened deeply to your fellow panelists, what occurred to you that you would like to ask one of them?
Sorry. So I am a person who follows Christ. And I was very confused, Ross, by some of your statements, because I know that I am created in the image of God. And when I was 15, I didn't understand, or I didn't understand the implications of being undocumented. But I told myself that if God decided that this was going to be something that I was going to endure in this life, that I would give it my best. And I know that Christ gave his life for me. And I'm not a project. So my question to you is, as an immigrant and a follower of Christ, how can you put yourself in a position to judge me?
I'm
Is
not
that-
judging.
Who's
Sorry.
that, to me?
No, that was
Ross.
to me, Sheriff Hunt. I got the tough question tonight. So, I'm not judging anybody for the decisions they made. In our process, when we came out here on our J visas, in order to get an H-1B, you need a degree. Now, I don't have a degree, so I had to show proof that I could. It's basically, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's 3 years of work experience with graduating responsibility for every year of college. So I went through all that process. Now, I could have legally stayed because my wife would have had the H-1B, and that was at the start of that process, but I wouldn't have legally been able to work. So I was at a position where it would be making a choice, either do we go back to New Zealand or Australia, or do I violate the law and work taking money under the table? Thankfully, I wasn't put in that position. I got the approval, I was able to get the H-1B, and go through the process. So I'm not judging anybody for the decisions. Your decision to come here wasn't your own, it was your parents that made that decision. There's got to be a way forward for people like yourself. I talked to Jeremy about this before the panel. If I were to give it to the audience here, if I were to sponsor my parents on a green card, it would take approximately a year, and they'd have to show proof that they weren't going to be a burden on tax dollars or taxpayers. If I were to sponsor my sister and brother-in-law and their children, it would take at least 12 years, and you'd have to show the same proof. So it's a very, very difficult process to go through if I were going to do that. Of course, we're not going to do that, but if I were to do that. So I'm not judging anybody for the decisions that were made by people outside of themselves. If you're a parent in here, you've got to ask yourself this question: would you put your child on a bus on San Salvador on a Wednesday afternoon and send them north in the hope that they would be able to take part of some program promised by some president at some particular time? So definitely not judging anybody for coming here. I think there should be a process. There's got to be a legal process. We are a sovereign nation. We have the absolute right to set our laws as we see fit. And if you don't like those laws, then work to get them changed. Everybody's got a phone. They can call up their member of Congress and say, hey, look, this is a great bill. It's got some great points. I don't like this. I do like this. Please vote on it. And I think that's something we've got to do for the population that have come here, whether they're refugees, whether they're undocumented. So if you mistook me judging, not the case.
Thank you. And I think we're setting a tone here that is what we want as we conclude this panel, which is this deep listening and the respect for each other as we answer this question. And that last exchange, I think, illustrated it. So now, Jeremy, is there a question as you listened to as you did your deep listening, is there a question that you would like to ask that crossed your mind? This is here and now. This is on this stage tonight. This is not anything preconceived. Is there anything you would like to ask?
Well, and it's a question for Ross, but it's not meant to be confrontational. No, not at all. Not at all.
Bring it.
Well, of course. The write-up, Nancy's write-up on Sunday mentioned that you were a Rush Limbaugh listener, right? And even at your own citizenship, at your naturalization ceremony, I was at it, right? You asked if you could register.
Let anybody into the federal courthouse these days.
Right. You asked it that you could, if you could register as a member of the Tea Party, right? It was we are friends, and we have these spirited debates. The question is, how, when any Republican attempts to reach across the aisle and search for bipartisan solutions to our immigration problems, they are hailed by that media as rhinos and ultimately face a primary against often let's just say colorful individuals, right? And which results in a hardening of that person's position and an unwillingness to engage in conversation. How do we break through that?
That's an excellent question. There are some people on the right that their position is, in a lot of cases, born out of ignorance. I operate on a lot of forums, and people will just throw it out there. Why don't you just become a citizen? So I break down the process, what it takes, how long it takes, the sort of money you're looking at spending, the process from visa to visa. Some visas don't give you access. Some of them will respond back and say, well, I didn't realize that. And some people will just, they're haters. They don't want to understand. And that's the problem, is we're not prepared to, Rhino's Republican in name only. That's a classic example of people on the right sometimes. And I'm not saying this is exclusively on the right. It's not the position I hold. But it is a problem. I don't know how you break through to some people that are adamant. I was asked the question by the reporter when they interviewed prior to the article going in the newspaper. There's a lot of immigrants that say, well, I'm in now, so shut the door and forget everybody else. And I would never hold that, and I would argue that those people forget who they are, why they came here, and where they came from.
Thank you.
And that's yeah, as I say, it's a tough question, Jeremy, and I don't really know.
Thank you. It is a tough question, and thank you for your answer. Sheriff Barnes, as you listen to your fellow panelists, do you have a question?
I'm going to cut you some slack. Mine is for the attorney.
Jeremy.
As a fellow officer of the court, if we expect our citizens to obey and adhere to the law, should we not expect those who are not citizens to do the same?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When it comes to, however, how the law is enforced and how it is carried out, we have to think about our resources and we have to think about our priorities. That was my precise point, is that if someone has violated a civil immigration law and is in the United States without permission, that person is vulnerable to being deported. There's no doubt about that. But if there are 8 ICE officers in this area, and I don't want to squabble about numbers, but it is a low number, okay? Then how should those officers be spending their time? The examples that I gave you used to be rare, used to be not commonplace, that someone that is a complete picture of someone that contributes to their community suddenly being arrested and detained unjustly by immigration. That was something that used to happen every once in a while when it would make a lot of fanfare and a lot of headlines. It's every day now. It's every day now of this practice, and it's because of enforcement that just says not who poses a danger to our community. No, the question is, who's in front of me?
But again, the question was, your answer was yes, that they should adhere to the laws. That's what it comes down to.
Absolutely.
As an officer of the court, you and I have not have the ability to decide that.
Thank
It's
you.
up to the laws.
Thank you. That was for Jeremy. Thank you very much. Adamu?
Yeah, thank you. I think my question will be for Sheriff Barnes. Earlier on, somebody from the audience posed a question regarding the number of people who have been detained and have been deported from the county jail in 2017. And if I heard you well, you said the number is not that big. But still, even if it's one person that is deported, it's still significant because it's a family member, maybe a father, a mother, who is being torn away from their loved ones. Even though the number may not be great, what would you say to that family of the deported person?
I'd say, I'm sorry, I'm truly sorry that that happened to you, but I have to adhere to the law. And I have to do what the law tells me I have to do because I'm constitutionally bound to do that.
Even if that person is not a criminal, hasn't committed any crime?
You're saying that they're taking them out. I'm not taking them out. It's not me that's doing it.
I understand.
It is ICE that's doing it. It's they have the authority to do it. I don't. Local law enforcement, folks, if you don't take anything out of this tonight, please take this with you. Local law enforcement has no authority over undocumented, illegal, whatever you want to say. They have no authority over them. It only comes, ICE does, the federal government does. And that's what it comes down to. And the fears I understand, as Laura mentioned, I understand those fears, and I truly hate them. I've had people come into my office who have told me that, because they felt they could trust me, that they were illegal. And you know what I said to them? Shame on you. You should have done it the right way. Now, how can I help you? And if we've actually arrested people who have been violated by their own kin, things like that that go on. We don't report that to ICE because I'm not required to do it. He just told you what I'm required to report to. But if I'm required to do it, I've got to do it. I cannot put this county, this city, this state in the position where they're going to be sued and there's going to be so much money that is going to be lost because of that.
Thank you. The last person is Ross. Question that crossed your mind?
This would be for Lara. What to you personally does a Clean Dream Act look like? What do you want to see in your situation and for people that are in the same situation as you? What is a clean, I'm using that term Dream Act, but what does that look like to you personally? Not anything that's politically on the board right now in Congress, but what does it look like to you as a person?
Right. I'm sorry, I can't let it go, but I have to say that at one point, the Underground Railroad was illegal. And so with that, you know, the law is a construct of man. And it's the people in power who make these laws that we are so hung up on upholding. But going on with the Clean Dream Act, a Clean Dream Act is basically what individuals like me would hope to see. And what it means is a pathway to citizenship for individuals who were brought or are here as minors, but that doesn't have strings attached. So in other words, doesn't have levels or additional conditions under that, or that would allow our families to be further criminalized, that would not increase the number of Border Patrol agents or interior enforcement operations, that would basically come down and hunt the rest of my family and would leave me taking care of 2 young children by myself. That is what a Clean Dream Act looks like for me. And that is only a very small part of what not only our families need, but what the country needs. Because then that still leaves the better part of the 11 million undocumented population unaddressed. But no Border Patrol, no wall, no increased enforcement operations, and no criminalization of my parents and the rest of my family.
I think our panelists have illustrated in these answers, they've really illustrated deep listening and respect for each other, So I think each one asked one has illustrated a tone that we wanted to set tonight that I think that we have done. And the question that we came into this forum with is it possible to find a path forward? This program was entitled A Path Forward. And as you leave, I think it's good to reflect upon that and think, is it possible? Is it possible to find a path forward on immigration? Thank you.
Thank you to Whitney as well for doing a fantastic job as our moderator and as the panelists leave the stage. We are going to go back to Slido for just a minute if you care to take your phones back out. Did I say Slido?
That's correct.
Yeah, Slido, okay. Slido.com. So we're going to ask 3 of the same questions just to see if the results have changed just a bit. So our first question is up, and again, the passcode is up A818. So the first question is, what best describes your perception of the change in immigration policy since last year at this time? Okay. We're going to go on to our next question. How much do you believe immigrants enrich our community? And that's on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being none and 10 being significantly. All right, and our final question of the night, how much do you believe immigrants positively affect our community's economy? Again, 1 being none, 10 being significantly. All right, well, thank you again for coming out and participating, and at the next forum, maybe we'll do a little more of the interactivity with Slido. So thanks again for coming tonight.